In our world of unhealthy relationships, when we think about unhealthy relationships, you realize, and I know we're all Christians and we all try to put on the best possible look at times, but unhealthy relationships are far more common than healthy relationships. If we look at just marriages, most marriages are not all that healthy. And here's the reason, because any relationship, whether they're personal, whether they're marriage, or they're family, or they're people at work, most of those relationships tend to break down over time. It's intended, the relationships very often can make life worse for us. And doing what they're intended to do, and that is this, to make life better. Relationships are intended to make life better. God said about Adam, it's not good for him to be alone. He needs to be in a relationship. Jesus placed us in the church because it's not good for Christians to be isolated. You know how crazy we get when we're together, let alone if we're by ourselves. It shouldn't be that way. And very often, the best times, really, very often, not always, but very often, the best time of any relationship is at the beginning. They often are. The best times in our relationship is often in the beginning, right? Everything starts off great, say in a workplace. Employee loves the boss, boss loves the employees, yet little things start breaking down. And the same is true in our personal relationships. You just look at the sad fact that the majority of marriages today end in divorce. And those that don't end in divorce aren't necessarily happy marriages. And nobody intends to do that. I've done over 100 and something weddings over my lifetime. And nobody gets up there thinking, oh, this is going to end in a divorce, or this is not going to last long. I've had marriages where I've thought doing that is. And I think this is a huge indication that how we go about doing relationships. It's how we work in relationships, because relationships, no matter what they are, they require work. We know that. There are those little small areas that, like, even in a marriage where your spouse says something and it kind of grates you a little bit, but you're remember the first fight you ever had in your marriage? I still remember the very first fight Laura and I had on our honeymoon. But yeah, it was. And please don't repeat it. But the deal is, we would quickly make up because, oh, how could that possibly happen? We're so in love. I'm so sorry. Well, I didn't mean it. I'm so bad. But then it happened again and again and again and again. And you finally just think, wow, I'm not going to address it. I'm not going to keep short accounts. In fact, I might let the sun go down on my frustration. So we kind of sweep it under the rug. But over time, right, a lot of stuff starts accumulating under the rug. And we let it build up. And after a while, it creates resentment and a sense of, that there's so much going wrong in this relationship that I don't even have the energy to deal with it. And so we just start in our marriages with little exits. I don't mean exits in terms of another relationship, but just the little tiny exits that in a sense we just say, I'm just not going to work on it. And so we exit out of maybe intimacy, out of trusting, sometimes out of just trying. And that's why we're doing this series. And so I want to give some indicators that tell us which way our relationship is going. Relationships, by the way, move very slowly. And so very often if someone asks us, well, how's your relationship going? And most of us probably would say, because it's easier to say this, we would just say, it's about the same. We're sort of in neutral. We're sort of in a holding pattern. Maybe when the kids leave, we'll start putting more emphasis on it. But it's not in neutral. You're either going to become more healthy or more unhealthy. Healthy relationships. Here's a key deal. Healthy relationships are always, when they're healthy, are always growing in value. They don't start in the beginning with, great value and then they begin to lose it over time. They don't start, at making at first our life joyful and meaningful, and then it starts to wear down. No, healthy relationships are always growing in value. And I didn't say that, that they're always going to be peaceful relationships, or there's never going to be conflicts, or there's never going to be, times where you just kind of butt heads, but they're consistently growing in value. And so they get better with time. Look at this verse. This is from 2 Thessalonians 1:3. It says this, Paul writing, and he's talking to the church there in Thessalonica, and he says this statement. He says, your faith is growing more and more. So your relationship with God is growing. It's vertical, and it's growing more and more. And then it's connected to that, and we'll talk about that later, and the love every one of you has for each other is also growing. It's increasing. Now, does that mean they didn't have conflicts in that church? No. But their relationship, their bond was growing, just like their relationship vertically was growing. So there's a vertical. My relationship with God is growing more and more, and my horizontal relationships are becoming stronger and better and increasing in love. In fact, the love I have, say, for Laura is much more mature than it was in the beginning. So, they're not deteriorating. Healthy relationships always grow in value. They become unhealthy as relationships lose their value. Right? You've heard this. Often couples sort of just give up. And when you ask them why, and the attitude sometimes is, they may not always verbalize it, sometimes they do, they'll just say, you know what, it's just not worth it. The relationship has begun to lose value. I mean, I would talk to her about it. I would talk to him about it. We've been through it. It's just not worth it. So, remember, last week we talked about some areas. One of the areas is just listening. So here are things that can add value to our relationships. Now, just real quick, this is really a short message. Again, I tell you that. Doesn't mean it's true, but I'll tell you that. I mean, if I just go by the number of pages, it's like, should be out of here by 10 minutes. So this is going to be very practical. No great, you're not going to have any great new truths You're not going to leave here thinking, oh, I never understood that. Right? No. You understand most of what I'm going to say. This is a call back to those things, right? That's what Old Testament prophets did. Now, we often think of a prophet as saying something new and this, and everybody's wise. No. The Old Testament prophets primarily, they didn't say anything new to the people. Most often, they were calling the people back to what they already knew. It was often a call back, in that case, to the people to keep the covenant that they'd known about. So again, and here's the next thing before we get into some of these things. It's going to be very practical. Here's the next, is that it's going to be to our wills. In other words, it's a matter for you and me. It's a matter of choice. You don't have to wait for the Holy Spirit to just, shake you. I mean, He can illuminate this, but it's going to come ultimately down to you choosing. Look at this. This is from Ephesians 4:29. Now, this is to all of us in relationships. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but instead, only what is helpful for building others up. Now, this is directed to the church, but it's certainly applied to the relationships we have in church, to all of our relationships, and to our marriage. Don't let unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but what is helpful for helping others. Look at this. According to their needs, that it may benefit those who are listening. So it benefits them. Now, again, this is a choice. The very few words there says, do not let. He's not saying it to anybody else, or don't go to any kind of seminar. He said, you, don't let unwholesome talk. That's a choice. We are to consistently make the choice in our relationships not to tear down, but to build up. When we're building up, guess what? We're adding value. We're allowing the relationship to go forward. And look at the text at the end. It says that it may benefit them. That's adding value to their lives. See, the reason most relationships tend to go downward is this. It is more natural for me, for you, to go with unwholesome talk than it is to go with beneficial. It's so much more natural, especially, listen, when I'm frustrated, to tear down relationships, or at least to tear down the person. And so the writer wants us to be aware of it, and so he says, listen, a reminder, don't do that. We have to commit that each day we're going to add value to our friendships, our relationships, and that does not always come naturally. It's fair to say that most of us struggle, right? When we talk about value, most of us struggle, and this is not just Therapy 101, especially in our culture, a lot of us struggle with our own sense of value. This world has an insidious way of sucking life out of us. It has a way of dehumanizing us, where we're known by people that we do work with or accounts with. We're known as a number, not a person. And it takes us out of that nurturing relationship, the grind of our daily lives, just being out there, begins to wear on us. And so our relationships are something that can build us up. We don't need more tearing down. I thought about this, especially when my kids were younger. I still take my youngest daughter to the school bus. And I remember when I would take all my kids, they'd all get on the same bus, especially when we were in Whidbey on Seattle. And, and so I would, my kids would stay in the car, and there would be other kids where their parents didn't love them as much, and so they just left them at the bus stop. And I would just watch these young kids, elementary kids, and they're like jumping and yelling, and they're, ooh, And I remember this one particular kid, he just kept going. He was like nuts, but it was a happy nuts, and he just couldn't wait. And he's going to school, right? He's not going to Disney. He's going to school, but he's so excited, and they're all running and chasing each other, and they're having a great big smiles, and it's just great. You never see people that are adults getting on a train going into the city to work like that, right? We have a tendency to just kind of, with life, we lose that sense of just happiness, of joy. It just happens. Healthy relationships give us that safe place where value is increased in us rather than diminished. Think of that. You need it. That relationship needs it. Instead of destroying, which is so easy to do, the person's sense of worth, we build it up. And that's a choice. Here's another way. And it's, you've heard of this verse. In relationships, we sharpen each other. This is a verse that I think every male knows by now. Proverbs 27:17 says this: as iron, did I say that too Southern? As iron sharpens iron. You want an umbrella? Did you get insurance? As iron sharpens, you want to go to the theater? As iron sharpens iron, so, and I will change this, so one person sharpens another, right? We sharpen. Now, by the way, while you're hearing this, that just always kind of made me a little feel yicky, because this is not manipulating. It's just the natural thing. When you have two people in a relationship, we're not harping at each other. We're not trying to manipulate one another to be the way we think you should be. The idea is that there are two different people, and each help us to understand another perspective. There are different gifts that each person has, and those gifts are at work, and we gain insights. Laura, for example, sometimes I'll come home and I'll just load on her, and I'll say, what somebody did at the church or at the office? What somebody did? And she'll say, well, maybe they were feeling, and I think, oh man, I think you're right. And it ticks me off, honey, that you're right. Can you imagine what it would be like if we try to sharpen one another? Not forcing or pushing, but we just normally allow that process, sharpen one another emotionally instead of depleting them. Can you imagine if someone sharpened one another by building them up rather than making little quick comments that tear them down? Can you imagine if we sharpened people vocationally instead of, kind of daggering them? If we sharpened them spiritually instead of judging them, we would add value by sharpening their lives. Here's another thing. We would motivate them. Good relationships motivate them to be better, to be more. And by the way, this motivation, it doesn't push them away, and it actually brings them closer. Sometimes I know this for a fact, we have a tendency to live at the level of what others expect of us. And that's true in a marriage. In other words, if a spouse is saying to another spouse, you always do that. That's your normal reaction. That's and it's negative. And then the other person will have that tendency to live at what's expected. We do it with children, right? We say to our children, Billy, you just don't listen. Billy, you don't take responsibility. Or Billy, you're this or you're that. And I will tell you, Billy will live and rise to those expectations. Hebrews 10:24 says this, let us consider how we can spur one another. You ever been on a horse where you want to get it going? You got to give it a little spur, let them know that you're there. Let us consider how we can spur one another on, not to move, but to spur one another on toward love and good deeds. I'm going to tell you, you'll never spur somebody else on by being critical or criticizing or stating with unwholesome talk something we expected. I knew you would do that. I knew you would act that way. That's so important. You know what an unhealthy relationship does? It motivates us to be worse. Healthy relationships motivate us to be better. And my natural response really is not to motivate. It's not to spur the other to love and to good deeds, especially when I'm frustrated and especially when the heat is on. Things that I've often said in the heat of the moment that I wish I could take back. See, and if I have someone in my life who is always motivating me forward, if I have somebody who's in my life who's motivating me to love and to have good deeds, well, that's a person then who's adding value to me. That is a relationship that has meaning. That is someone whom I want my life to be with, to someone that I hold dear. Another way we add value is that we encourage them. Are you doing that in your relationships? Now, you think, well, they haven't done anything for me to encourage. Well, yes, they have. Truth be told, many of our relationships are relationships that discourage us. Look at 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore, look what he says. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just like you're doing. Healthy relationships build us up instead of sucking life out of us. That's why when we are in bad relationships, we begin to make distance. We may not move out or move away from the relationship, but in our key relationships, very often we feel drained. We begin to close down. Eventually, we begin to live in different rooms. See, life sucks us dry enough. And to be in a relationship that only adds to the discouragement takes a toll after a while. In healthy relationships, we do the opposite. We relieve them. We relieve what? We relieve the burden they have. We relieve the stress. I mean, you don't have to be a pastor or a therapist or even know the answers. I know a lot of times in my intimate relationships, it's not a problem if I don't know the answer. It's just that I'm there to hear it. Relieve the stress, the anxieties. Remember Job, his friend, for 7 days sitting Shiva, a practice that Jewish people still do today. And they don't come with words of wisdom or a sermon tape. They just come and sit, and they're quiet. Galatians 6:2 says this, carry each other's burden. Galatians 6:2. Yes, it's coming. Carry each other's burdens. I got to ask you, are you doing that? Let me help you with this. Let's talk about what you're going through. I don't have the answer, but I'd like to hear what you feel. Unhealthy relationships are where we add to the burden. Now, here's one of the ways we add value, and here's another one, is this: by appreciating the other person. When something appreciates, what? The value goes up, right? Like a house. It appreciates, unless you have a house in New Jersey. Value is added. If you're in New Jersey, it just stands still. Value is added when something appreciates. Appreciation can be difficult also if we ourselves don't feel appreciated. So the tendency in some of our close relationship is this: well, I will appreciate them when they start appreciating me. See, so appreciation, the hard part is starting. Appreciation, let me tell you this before you leave, this is the key thing. Appreciation begins with you, not them. It's your heart attitude, not theirs. It's you. It begins with you. Now, let me add some qualifiers, or at least with appreciation. We don't appreciate people to manipulate them. That's false appreciation. You ever have people do that? You know, Dwight, I loved your long message last Sunday. But have you thought about maybe cutting those suckers in half? We add appreciation. One of the things that we appreciate, and it's difficult, is our differences, right? Have you noticed that some of the things that attracted you to a relationship can also drive you nuts, right? Please laugh, some response. See, I have my reading glasses, so I don't know what you look like. Look at this. This is 1 Corinthians 12. This is so important. 1 Corinthians 12:18. I'm looking. And now I'm reading. In fact, God has arranged, now, and this is talking about the body of Christ, but it's relationships in the body, and so it can extend to even all relationships. God has arranged the parts in the relationship, every one of them, just as He wanted them to be. Your friend, your spouse, they're not you. So don't try to change them. If they were all one part, translation, if they were all like you, where would the body be? And then he goes on to say, what if the whole body was a big leg? Right? What would you do? Or a big hand? And then he says, I think, a big eye, which is just gross. What would the body look like? You know, I'm a big eye in need of cataract surgery. In other words, Paul is saying, what if everybody in the relationship was like you? We'd be a mess. Appreciate the differences. It's the differences that allow for growth in the relationship. Differences can become complementary. Again, it's not just marriage this is all about, but I'm using a lot of stuff because it's the deepest relationship I have. Laura and I have been married now almost 25 years. Now, let me just tell you real quick, and then don't repeat this. Laura is very, very, very a detailed person, right? You just wouldn't believe the things she maps out, things that she does. I am very, very much not that way. I do things spontaneously. Let me give you an idea. If we're thinking of a vacation, which I said one time to Laura, we were watching a movie or something, and this was when we lived in Bedford, and I said, Laura, let's go to Cabo. I hear a lot of people love Cabo. Leave the kids here, put them with your mom, and let's go to Cabo. When I said it, I was thinking like next week. So Laura says, well, we need to plan this. And I thought, oh, okay. And Laura, she will plan, she needs at least a year to plan this trip. You know, where are we going to stay? How are we going to get there? What about a car? Should that car, maybe we can get a better rental deal. What should we pack? You know, and she will actually buy stuff 6 or 7 months before we go. Sometimes she'll come back and she'll say, like, I got this. And I thought, well, why in the world would you buy that? Well, we might need this in Cabo. I just show up, right? I remember, I promise you, if you repeat this goes on the web. I remember, please, this is awful. I remember at our wedding rehearsal, you know how close a wedding rehearsal is to the actual wedding? I remember at the wedding rehearsal, Laura didn't really know me and my problem, and I really didn't know her and her problem, right? We didn't really know each other. And while we were there, I remember somebody came up, I don't know who it was, they were greeting us at the rehearsal dinner, and they said, well, where are you guys going on your honeymoon? And Laura said, because she thought I was like her, she says, well, Dwight has planned that, and he's going to surprise me, right? Now, the reason she said that is because she probably asked me weeks earlier, and I said, I'm going to surprise you, hon. And I remember after they left, and I thought, honeymoon really follows tomorrow. And so I quickly started making phone calls, and I did pull it off. And going back, like to Mexico, now those things drive me nuts because I just said, okay, we're married. We should just go on a honeymoon. Where do you want to go? Now, often, the Laura's detail to stuff drives me nuts. But it always happens. Like, for example, and this happened, we were in Cabo, and I remember while we were there, and I said, doggone it, Laura. I said, we should have thought to bring an electric adapter. And then she goes, you mean this one? I went, I don't know. So they begin to compliment. Now, when you appreciate, now here's the last part, and then we'll stop. Like a few more pages, but when you appreciate men, express it. Sometimes my kids, when they were younger especially, they will do something, they know that it's really good, and they'll look at me because the kids don't hide their face, right? Adults hide what's going on in here on their face. Kids don't. Whatever's going on in here is out here. And so when kids do something, they'll, Dad, look at this. And they look at me because they want applause, appreciation. So when you appreciate, express it. Appreciation has no value if it's all in here. It has to be expressed. So say it. Let me close with just 2 questions. How healthy are your relationships? How healthy is your relationship that are intimate relationships? Are they growing in health? Are you creating value? Are you creating value more and more? Is the relationship becoming more and more cherished? Your friendships. Let me start by this. How's your mouth? Wholesome talk? Or have you gotten into the practice of whatever goes through here goes through here? That's not good. Are you sharpening each other? Not manipulating, but are you sharpening each other? Becoming better people as a result? Are you spurring on one another? Are you a source of encouragement or discouragement? That may be why the relationship is being pulled apart. Are you carrying the other person's burden? Not being the answer man, woman, but you're just sharing the burden. Are you making the load of life that all of us feel, are you making it easier for that other person? And do you truly, truly appreciate them? I know you do. Sometimes we get into the mundane stuff, but sometimes when you feel like you might have lost that person through a health scare or an accident, you really begin to think, man, what would I do if I lost that relationship? Do you appreciate the differences? No, they're not like you. Thank God they're not like you. And then are you expressing it? Romans 14:19 says this: let us make every effort to do what leads to peace and mutual back and forth edification. Means building up, adding value. Goes to a choice. All right, let's stop. Would you bow your head? While your head is bowed, I want to ask you this key question. I have found that my relationship with God is a direct flow in my relationship with other people. If I have an unhealthy horizontal relationship, it is often a result of an unhealthy vertical relationship with God. Because everything I have to offer of value in a context of human relationship ultimately has to flow from what I'm receiving from my relationship to God. And if I'm not receiving anything from God, really I have nothing to offer. 1 John 4:19 says, we love because he first loved us. It's the only way we can love. Very often we're not receiving it from God, so we can't distribute it. We're not receiving value from God, so we can't really add value to anyone else. Everything in life, including relationships, starts with God, ends with God. And since relationships are the essence of life, healthy relationships start with God. Just very quickly, I just want to remind you, as we start to get into the, can't believe it, the Christmas season in a few weeks, we'll be talking about stuff already. The stores are probably going to start putting things up. That's why Christ came, not to introduce a religion, but to bring us into a relationship with him. We were separated from God. Intimacy was totally destroyed. And yet, God gave us value. He gave us value by sending his one and only Son to die on a cross. 1 John says, how do we know what real love is? That the Father sent his Son for you. If you've never committed your life to Christ, listen, you're going to have a hard time with any relationship. Connect with him. Connect with the real source of life, the real source of love, the real source of acceptance. And it's from that strength that you're able to reflect it to others. Lord, help us, I pray, as we do that. We respond. Lord, keep any of us from hiding behind that false hope that our relationships are neutral. They're not. They're moving in one direction or another. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.